All right, traders, welcome to today's recap. This is Christian from Hertz Tribeca Trade Group, and today is Monday the 9th, and geez, what a nice day for the markets overall. Really, really nice. I'm going to go over the S&P chart. We just did a quick member webinar. I'm going to be rolling out a new product at Tribeca Trade Group, so for members, it'll be discounted. I can't reveal what it is yet, but if you are a member, you will know about it. First things first. I'll spend just a quick 30 seconds on this, but overnight, really what has been concerning me is that, there's been a big breakdown in international markets. So, for us to kind of come in and, again, I was joking around about this pre-market that, a lot of guys on Twitter and I think a lot of retail traders, I don't know why, but it seems like they can't look at international markets. They seem to be, I'm kind of joking here, but they only look at like S&P futures and they're like, oh, look at these S&P futures go. Look at what China did overnight. It's up 2.8%. And again, everything's connected. So, I think when our futures opened up last night at 6 o'clock p.m., they were S&P futures were flat, then they went up 5 basis points. And then once Asia gapped up and kept going, then our markets are going to respond to it. So I think all in all, as much as I'm making fun of people who just look at S&P futures, I think it's just really good global breadth. Our market hung in there. The U.S. markets hung in there really well when everything else kind of went ugly. Europe, Asia, in Asia, Japan. So not just China. I think everybody really got fixated on China, but it was really all over the place. So when you see all green like this, it's good. And Europe didn't have a huge day today. They hung in there. The DAX got a little bit weaker midday or right before our open, and our futures came in a little bit based on that. But great to see this, right? Because we know that I think the one thing that the conclusion that you can make is that with all of these global markets weak and our markets holding up, and then when everything else rallies, so it just shows that right now the U.S. market is the place to be and holding up very well. All right, so I think that's important. I think a few people I talked about the ASHR ETF, possibly due for a bounce, as well as some of the emerging markets in this weekend's newsletter. We got that today. I think also the dollar coming in a little bit helped a lot. So if we go back to the S&P, I just went over this in today's webinar, but a couple things that may, looking at this chart, that you could probably point out, at least two things. Number one, we're returning to the scene of the crime. This is where the S&P had a lot of difficulty. There's a lot of overhead supply. Maybe this is, at this point, worthy of now getting through it. We'll see. So we're right at the top of value. I also have a dotted line trend line coming across here too, which is resistance. So now, it's been a pretty powerful rally. The other thing that I would say that should jump out at you is the MACD crossover, right? So that's, signifying a trend change, and just the first day it crossed over. So, I went from probably a couple weeks ago when all the international markets were breaking down to a little bit more bullish. Now, of course, everything participated today, so I'll talk about what I did today, but I certainly took some money off the table today. You just have to if you're trading options. If you're trading stock purely, that's it, and you're in a trend portfolio, there's not much maybe for you to do. You kind of ride the trend, but if you're in some July calls, which I am, I'm in some catalyst trades for earnings. I'm in some August trades. So, for me, you have to take some profits. Even though today it looks great, the overall market breadth looks amazing. Everything seems to be participating, except for the defensive sectors today, which I'll go over those. But it looks very, very good. But at the same time, we just don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. Maybe we digest up here. We'll see. If you look at some of the other indices, Nasdaq is also firing off. A buy signal too. Sorry, my charts are a little bit slow right now. By the way, this was the last MACD crossover. It was all the way back here. So pretty nice looking swing. Kind of bounced around a little bit, then got going. So we're almost back to the highs. Remember, we got a little bit overbought up here. We're not overbought anymore. And then IWM, which has been the real strength the last month. Notice the last time we got an MACD crossover here, and we had a nice swing up. So we're just coming upon one now. So we'll see if that sticks. Sometimes the first days of an MACD crossover, I sometimes like to make sure that it actually does crossover, because these can wipe out if the market ends up selling off. But listen, I think for the financials, I think a lot of people have been saying, I have not been one of them, but a lot of people have been saying these financials have to get going. So I do think that it's good for the market to see the financials going. I don't think the overall market has to go up if the financials chop around, but I think it's a good sign. What I also really liked was the industrials. I thought the industrials, we saw some accumulating in XLI calls last week. We saw more of them today, a little bit more today, but I think some of the industrials were ready to pop. So I'll talk a little bit about what I did today. I put on a Boeing trade. So we're going to have earnings for most of these names in 2 or 3 weeks. Netflix reports next week. I put on a trade last week for Netflix, a call spread, looking for a run into earnings. That is working beautifully. Took some of that trade off today. I put on a trade for Amazon, and again, if you're a member of Tribeca Trade Group, you get, not only do you get the chart and what I'm looking at in terms of the technicals, but you get the exact strike and the optimal maturity, I think, to take for a run into earnings. Remember, these FANG names, they've been doing this for the last couple quarters. They've really been running into earnings. So we've got trades on now in a few of these names, as well as Boeing, which I was able to take a target today in Boeing. So really nice. So again, those are some of my new trades today. The other trade that I was looking at was EW, which I still think looks fine, but just can't add. Some of these trades, it really depends on you whether or not they fit in your portfolio. But even though this was down a little bit today and underperforming, I still think it's worth a shot. There's another trade idea that I sent out. U.S. Steel, I think, is also interesting in here. I'm just kind of going randomly through symbols. FCX, we saw more calls today. We saw a big block last week. I talked about copper in the trading room last week being oversold. We got a nice bounce in copper today after that purple line was taken out. What a great signal that is. So again, what these purple lines are, they're virgin point of controls, a high area of volume that prices never return to. So again, they can act as really good magnets. You kind of think of them a little bit as filling a gap, right? Returning to a high volume area that prices never return to. So again, once you're outside of value and outside of a range, price will often seek those areas of volume concentration out. All right, so that's a couple trades. I thought energy was really interesting as well today. So besides Boeing, I think Caterpillar did very well today too. Deere, which we saw calls go up last week. I really had to manage that trade a bit. We saw weekly calls go up last week, and I rolled out of the weeklies into the monthlies. I will share this with you because, again, it's good to talk about not only the winners but the losers. But BAC, we saw big weekly calls go up last week. I would say, and then as the week went on, a garden variety of calls that went up in BAC. I stuck on the weekly calls. I did not roll them over. And, this is a great example of trade management. Give yourself more time in your trades. Now, I just went into some trades for about 24 cents last week in BAC. So I lost the full boat. I lost the 24 cents. If I would have put this on as a monthly trade, going out even just still very short term, I was a cheapskate and didn't go into the monthlies and maybe spending about 45 cents. I would have had a huge winner today. But I did not do that. So again, a great example of not managing my trades correctly and having too short term of a trade on, and looking for a big winner and only spending 24 cents but losing the whole 24 cents. So that's okay. I also like the energy move. I've been long Marathon. Marathon is back to the 52-week highs, it looks like. Also, RRC looked really good. RRC looks like dynamite. This looks pretty good, moving above the this congestion spot above the 200-day moving average. So really nice. What else? The Chinese internet names, of course, everybody's so fixated on these names. IQ still not above, not regaining the short-term moving average, but I guess you could call this, you know, uh, a wedge pattern. I like to wait for these things to reclaim the short-term moving averages, so I have something to trade against. I guess you could also trade against the bottom of value. I think Hua was the real winner in this space in your really momentum names. This one did get above, so if my criteria is for watch for the price action to get above the 5 and the 20, you got it today, and maybe use the yellow line there as your stop. All right, so you got it in this one. A few other names that we saw today in terms of option activity. Of course, we saw more BAC. We saw some more Wells Fargo, I believe, more Citi. Why is this not coming up? There we go. We saw some MNK calls. Sorry, my computer's just about had it, I think, for the day. We saw some Snap momentum. There was a rumor out about a story out about Snap and Amazon. We saw some Marriott calls. Twitter, pretty amazing. We really didn't see, and I put this out on Twitter earlier, that up until like about 11 o'clock today, there really wasn't much calls or puts. And then all of a sudden, then Twitter came out and made a statement about those users that they were not adding those into their monthly active user number, and we saw all this call buying, and really like aggressive. And I was on a conference call, so yeah, it was about, I think it was after 12 o'clock, and they started going nuts after buying sweeping calls left and right, and you could see they bought all different kinds. There was also a spread that went up. They sold puts and bought a, I think it was a 1x2 call spread as well. That went up a little bit before that. A little bit more flow in the financials. Applied Materials, they were buying weekly calls. So there's a couple other names. A couple other names on my radar. There's so many names that did well today. But I've been watching this race, which I started a position in. I think it now looks pretty interesting. It's starting to regain those short-term moving averages. But there's obviously a lot of charts to go through, a lot to look at. I mentioned I was going to talk a little bit about the defensives, so I think this is a pretty good sign. Look at XLU, got absolutely smoked today, which is more, of a risk-on feel. Down 3% after a nice run-up. So it's tough. I know a lot of people have been talking about consumer staples. I don't really care for this group. I think it was due for a bounce, and I think you got a bounce. But I think it could have a chance to resume a downtrend. It's below the 200-day moving average. One group that I still think looks pretty interesting, which I haven't really talked about yet, is still the healthcare. Now, they kind of got beaten up a little bit because Trump was out with a headline. But I still think there's a lot of names. I talked about Celgene a lot. I sent out a chart about Celgene. Let the 50-day moving average be your stop, continuing to move higher. And I think some of these other names did pretty well today too. Amgen continued over that VPOC. That's a nice move. Gilead also strong. All right, so we'll end it there. Again, a lot of stuff to talk about. I could talk about it for another 10 minutes about all these movers, but a lot of stuff to kind of go through. But again, great market breadth, and we'll see if it continues. We got a lot of MACD crossovers, huge breadth. So we'll see how long it lasts. For me, taking targets, putting on a couple of selective new trades, and going from there and letting your winners run after you've taken some off the table. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Have a great night. See you tomorrow.